Usually when we talk about professional success, there's this expectation of a complex formula.
Oh, absolutely. Like it's advanced calculus or something.
Right. It feels like advanced calculus. You plug in the prestigious degree, the six-syllable corporate jargon, the aggressive networking strategy, and then the algorithm just magically spits out a corner office and a six-figure salary, of course.
Yeah, we treat career advancement like a highly guarded mathematical equation that only a few people know how to solve.
Yeah.
I mean, it creates this impenetrable wall around the professional world.
It really does. You feel like if you don't know the exact corporate code, you're just going to fail. But when you strip away all that noise, that complex calculus looks a lot more like, well, basic addition.
It's surprisingly simple when you get down to it.
Exactly. We're looking at a professional landscape that we often make incredibly intimidating when the reality is much more foundational. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a really fascinating detour.
Yeah, this source material is a bit different from our usual stuff.
It is. The source material you shared with us is an excerpt from a YouTube channel called Mr. English Channel. Specifically, it's an episode titled English for Work Made Easy, hosted by these two people, Emily and Paul.
And on the surface, this is a beginner's language guide, right? It's designed for folks learning English as a second language.
Yeah, but our mission today is a little different. We are using this really basic English lesson to extract the absolute fundamental blueprint for professional communication.
Because by stripping workplace communication down to its most basic, beginner-level components, we can actually uncover some profound psychological truth about human interaction at work.
I love that.
When forced to use simple words, you can't hide behind jargon. You have to mean exactly what you say. It forces us to ask why we use all that convoluted corporate speak in the first place.
Right, because often complex vocabulary is just armor. We use it to gatekeep or maybe to mask our own imposter syndrome.
Oh, definitely. It's a defense mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to me, entering the professional world is essentially like learning a completely new language from scratch, regardless of what your mother tongue is.
That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, you have to learn the script. Every office has its own vocabulary, its own unspoken rules, its own rhythm. And whether you, the listener, are prepping for a massive corporate boardroom meeting right now, or you're just casually curious about how communication dynamics actually function, returning to the absolute basics like this can yield some incredible aha moments.
It reveals the core mechanics of how we relate to one another under pressure.
Which brings us to the very first pressure test Emily and Paul discuss in the video, which is the job interview.
The ultimate pressure test.
Oh, for sure. And Paul actually mentions that just thinking about the interview makes his hands go cold.
Yeah, that physical reaction is, well, it's the classic physiological response to stress.
Really? Just the cold hands.
Absolutely. When the brain perceives a threat, even a purely social one, like a job interview, it triggers the fight or flight response. Blood is literally rushing away from Paul's extremities like his hands and moving toward his vital organs. It is a completely universal human experience.
Wow, so he's basically bracing for a physical attack. That makes so much sense. Their very first tip for dealing with that overwhelming stress is to prepare. But they don't mean like reading a textbook or memorizing a company's stock history.
No, it's much more practical than that.
Yeah, they specifically suggest practicing out loud in front of a mirror, like literally saying, "Hello, mirror."
I love that part. From a behavioral psychology standpoint, practicing out loud is a vital mechanism for stress reduction.
How so? Like, what does the mirror actually do?
Well, you aren't just memorizing words in your head. You are engaging your vocal cords, managing your breathing, and getting comfortable with the physical act of presenting yourself.
Oh, so you're getting the physical awkwardness out of the way.
Exactly. You are forcing your brain to take an abstract, terrifying concept and ground it in physical reality. Externalizing the narrative in a safe environment trains your nervous system to remain calm when you finally deliver those words in the high-stakes environment of the interview room.
Okay, so you're doing a dry run for your nervous system. That's brilliant. Then they tackle what might be the most daunting question in any interview, which is, tell me about yourself.
Oh, people hate that question.
It's the worst. But Paul's advice here is to stick to simple facts. Name, current job, and one thing you like. So for him, he says, my name is Paul, I am a podcast host, and I like talking to people.
It's elegant, isn't it?
It really is.
He constructs a clear, linear narrative. He establishes his identity, his current professional standing, and a core motivation. Boom, done.
Then they get to the next question, which is, why do you want this job? And Paul's advice is to keep it purely positive about the company. He suggests saying things like, I like your computers, or the coffee is very good.
Simple and sweet.
Yeah, and then stating a basic skill like, I am good at math, or I am good at helping people. Now, I have to push back a little here, though.
Oh, how so?
Well, I look at an answer like, I like your computers, and I think about a highly competitive, specialized field. If I walk into a tech startup or some cutthroat finance firm and say, I want to work here because the coffee is very good, I feel like I'm going to be laughed out of the room.
You feel like it's too naive.
Yeah. Doesn't an employer in those environments expect a certain level of sophistication, maybe even a little industry jargon, just to prove you belong there?
What's fascinating here is the psychology of the hiring manager.
Yeah.
You have to remember that by the time you were sitting in the interview chair, they have already seen your resume.
Right. They know your specs.
Exactly. They already know your technical qualifications. The interview is primarily a behavioral test. They are basically asking themselves, can I sit next to this person for 40 hours a week?
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do I actually want to be around you?
Yes. So, while I like your computers might sound overly simplistic for a senior engineering role, the underlying mechanism is what matters. It conveys genuine, unpretentious enthusiasm.
So you think we overcomplicate our answers when employers actually just want basic positive energy?
We absolutely do.
Yeah.
We often try to sound overly intellectual to impress people, but we end up sounding, well, robotic or insincere.
Yeah, totally.
A highly qualified candidate who buries their motivation in 5 minutes of synergistic corporate jargon is often less appealing than a candidate who simply and earnestly states, I admire the tools you build here, and I am exceptionally good at solving complex math problems.
Wow. Yeah, when you put it like that, it sounds way more confident.
The vocabulary might scale up depending on the job, sure.
Yeah.
But keeping your answers focused on simple truths and maintaining a positive tone are universal hiring metrics. They signal friendliness and competence, which are the two traits every manager is desperately looking for.
And that genuine enthusiasm naturally translates to your physical demeanor, too. It's why the source places such heavy emphasis on the simple act of smiling.
Yes, the smile is crucial.
Because Paul is incredibly nervous, but Emily reminds him that a smile communicates a very basic message. It just says, I am a nice person.
It is the absolute fastest way to disarm the inherent adversarial nature of an interview.
They also cover the dress code, advising candidates to wear nice clothes, a clean shirt, and definitely no pajamas.
No pajamas. Very important tip.
It gave me a really good laugh, but it shows you are serious about the job. And then, to close the interview, the advice is to say, thank you for your time, stand up, give a firm handshake, and smile again.
Every single one of those actions, the attire, the handshake, the smile, the expression of gratitude, is a structured demonstration of
A
respect.
structured demonstration of respect. I like that.
You are signaling that you respect the interviewer's time, the company's culture, and the professional environment. You are establishing a baseline of trust.
And securing that baseline of trust is what actually gets you through the front door. So you practiced your smile, you left the pajamas at home, you aced the interview, and boom, you got the job.
Congratulations.
Right. But crossing that threshold introduces an entirely new set of dynamics. You are now part of a daily ecosystem. How do you survive the day-to-day with your new colleagues? Emily and Paul start with the absolute basics here. The morning greeting.
Using people's names.
Yes. Good morning, Sarah. Good morning, Tom.
Acknowledging someone by name validates their presence in the environment. It seems small, but it calibrates the social tone for the entire day.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the source brings up a scenario that highlights how quickly that calm tone can shatter.
And a computer problem.
Yes, Paul's computer isn't working. He adorably describes it as sleeping. But his gut reaction to this problem is to just loudly shout, help!
Which is an incredibly honest manifestation of how we all feel when our technology fails us.
I mean, the image of a guy standing in an open plan office just screaming into the void is hilarious.
It's so visceral.
But Emily gently corrects him. She tells him to use the magic words. Instead of shouting, you walk over to a colleague's desk and say, excuse me, Tom, I have a question, or can you help me, please?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this interaction is a masterclass in workplace emotional intelligence.
Really? Just saying, excuse me.
Think about it. Shouting for help is a completely unfiltered emotional reaction. When you shout in a quiet office environment, you trigger an involuntary biological response in everyone within earshot. You literally spike their cortisol.
Oh, wow, so you're stressing everyone else out, too.
You force the whole room to suddenly orient toward a perceived threat. It creates localized panic and disrupts the entire ecosystem.
It forces everyone around you into a state of alarm without giving them any context whatsoever.
Precisely. But using the magic word saying, excuse me, and please, acts as a functional tool for de-escalation.
Hmm.
Politeness is the mechanism we use to create psychological safety.
Psychological safety. That's a
Uh,
great term.
By walking over and saying, excuse me, you are acknowledging that Tom is currently busy. You are respecting his autonomy and his time. And by framing it as, I have a question or can you help me, you are presenting a solvable problem rather than a crisis. You are appealing to a very deeply ingrained human desire to be helpful.
Because people naturally want to help, provided you give them the chance to be the hero instead of just startling them out of their chair.
Exactly. You transform a moment of panic into a moment of collaborative problem solving.
That is so smart. The source material also notes that when addressing the boss, you should use their family name, like, "Good morning, Mr. Smith," to maintain that professional boundary.
Right. Maintaining the hierarchy politely.
Yeah. And all of this politeness, this structured respect, leads to an ultimate goal that gets Paul very excited, which is a promotion. He really wants to be Manager Paul.
He is incredibly insightful to connect those two things, honestly. Leadership is rarely just about technical skill.
It's not just being good at the spreadsheets.
No, not at all. When upper management is deciding who gets to be Manager Paul, they are observing how that person handles the daily friction of office life. Do they shout at their sleeping computer and elevate the stress levels of the room? Or do they calmly and politely navigate the problem with their peers?
Right. Who do you actually want leading the team in a crisis?
That structured respect is the foundation of effective leadership.
So you've mastered the immediate office ecosystem. You know how to ask Tom for help without causing a massive panic. But eventually, to really grow your career, you have to step outside that safe, predictable bubble and expand your circle.
The dreaded networking.
Yes. This brings us to the final boss of workplace communication, the networking conference.
The word alone makes people tense up.
Oh, I get sweaty just thinking about it. The source points out that conferences can be massive, like 100 to 500 people. Emily and Paul both admit that they are shy, and the idea of a room full of 500 strangers makes them very nervous.
And they should be nervous. It is an objectively unnatural environment for human beings from an evolutionary perspective.
Wait, really? Evolutionarily?
Oh, yeah. Our brains evolved in small tribal groups. We are not wired to walk into a brightly lit convention center filled with hundreds of people we don't know and immediately start establishing high-value social bonds.
That makes me feel so much better about hating mixers.
The brain interprets that sea of unfamiliar faces as an overwhelming cognitive load, which is why networking feels so physically exhausting.
So how do you survive it? The strategy Emily and Paul outline starts small. They say, don't try to work the whole room. Just smile, say hello, state your name, and say where you work.
Keep it contained.
Yeah, keep it contained. But then they reveal the absolute secret weapon of networking, which is asking a question. Where do you work? Or what is your name? Paul points out that people love to talk about themselves.
It's very true.
Emily tells him his only job after asking the question is to listen, smile, and occasionally nod and say, mm-hmm, or interesting.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally view networking. Most people view it as a high-stakes performance.
Yes, you feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room.
Right. They believe they have to be the most charismatic, articulate, and impressive person there. They think they have to constantly sell their own value. That self-imposed pressure is exactly what causes the anxiety.
I always think of networking as a game of conversational tennis.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, when you're nervous, you feel like you have to keep serving aces, just perfectly hitting the ball over and over to prove you belong on the court. But asking a simple question like, where do you work, is really just gently hitting the ball over the net.
Let them hit it back.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
giving the other person the chance to play. And more importantly, it lets you take a breather. You get to stand on the court, catch your breath, and just nod while they do the heavy lifting of talking.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanics of it. By asking a question and making the other person the center of attention, you completely remove the performative pressure from yourself.
You don't have to be the star anymore.
You transition from performing to facilitating. Because people naturally enjoy talking about their own experiences, they will associate the positive feeling of being heard with you. Paradoxically, by doing less talking, active listening becomes your most powerful networking tool.
Of course, every volley has to end eventually. And this brings up a detail from the source document that highlights the sheer awkwardness of these events. Paul's instinct when he wants the conversation to end is to just run away, to get a cookie.
We are back to the flight response.
Yes, run to the snack.
The social battery is completely depleted, and the brain is signaling a desperate need to seek calories in isolation.
It is so deeply relatable. I mean, we have all been in that exact position. You've exhausted your small talk. You've said interesting 3 times. The silence is stretching. And suddenly that tray of chocolate chip cookies across the room looks like a literal life raft.
You just want to vanish.
You just want to vanish. But Emily lays down the law. No running. You must end the conversation politely. You say, "It was very nice to meet you." You hand over your business card with your name and email, and you say, "Please send me an email." Boom. Clean, professional exit.
It provides cognitive closure for both parties.
Cognitive closure.
Yeah, because running away leaves the other person confused and slightly rejected, which obviously damages the connection you just built. The polite exit maintains the professional bridge. Handing over the business card and asking for an email creates a clear action item, signaling that the interaction was valuable even as it concludes.
It is so refreshing to see these massive, stress-inducing professional hurdles broken down into such manageable actions. We've gone from practicing your origin story in front of a bathroom mirror to manage physiological stress, to resisting the urge to scream at a frozen computer by using magic words to build psychological safety, all the way to surviving a 500-person conference without literally sprinting away for a cookie.
It demystifies the entire professional experience, doesn't it? It proves that the foundation of a successful career isn't some secret code.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? I think the massive takeaway here is that whether you are a Fortune 500 CEO or you are a brand new hire walking into your very first day on the job, the absolute bedrock of success doesn't change.
It's always the fundamentals.
It is simple, positive, and polite communication. When you strip away the industry jargon, the fancy titles, and the corporate posturing, it reveals a very basic truth. We are all just human beings who want to be heard, who want to be respected, and who want a little bit of help when things go wrong.
That brings me to a final detail from the source that I found incredibly thought-provoking.
Yep, what was that?
At the very end of the video, Emily and Paul ask their viewers to leave a comment answering a simple question, which is, what is your dream job? And Paul immediately declares that his dream job is to be a pizza taster.
Manager Paul, the pizza taster. I love it.
It highlights something profound about how we view our careers, I think. We spend an enormous amount of time obsessing over the specific tasks of our jobs, the technical requirements, the prestige of the title. We chase the complex calculus.
Right.
But if you strip away the job title, whether you're an executive, a software engineer, or a pizza taster, and you just look at the foundational ways we communicate, well, it makes you wonder, is your true dream job really about the specific work you are doing? Or is it actually more about finding an environment where you feel completely comfortable?
Wow.
An environment where you know you can politely ask for help when your computer goes to sleep without any fear of judgment.
Maybe the dream isn't the task itself, but the ecosystem you get to do it in. An ecosystem built on that basic addition of human connection. That is definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.